Good evening, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the August Overview and Scrutiny Committee meeting. So welcome. And we have 11 committee members on our committee. And we will go see who is here and not here when we get to apologies of absence. We have officers present, and I'd like to ask them to introduce themselves, please.
Good evening, members. My name's Emma Coy, and I am the new head of corporate services and Section 151 officer. I started at Hart on the 1st of August.
We will go see who is here and not here when we get to apologies of absence. We have officers present, and I just put your present. So,
I'm Gareth Phillips, Joint Chief Executive.
We also have attending councillors. We have Councillor Radley, who will be joining the meeting for agenda items 8, 9 and 11, papers C, D and F respectively. And we also have Councillor Quarterman, who will be joining for agenda item 11, paper F. Emma Foy, who has just introduced herself, will be here for agenda items 7, 8, 9, 11 and papers C, D and F. We have two attending councillors, Councillor Crooks and Councillor Forster, as members attending our meeting. A few housekeeping points. I'd like to draw members' attention to the Overview and Scrutiny virtual meeting protocol, which all members have a copy of. Also, for this evening, the chat function should only be used to communicate with the chairman. That will be monitored by the two members of, or two officers from committee services. Also, if you wish to ask a question, please raise a virtual hand. And again, committee services will be monitoring whose hands are raised, and they will let me know, and we will attempt our very best to get questions in the right order of those being asked. So one final point is, if you are leaving the virtual meeting room, could you please turn off your camera, and when you return, turn it back on. Okay, thank you. So let's move on now to item 1 on the agenda, which are minutes of the previous meeting. Does anybody have any comments on these? Or are we ready to accept the minutes?
Question.
Okay, we have a question. Councillor Farmer.
Hopefully I've unmuted myself. Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'm happy to accept and to propose the minutes. I just have one point to make, and that is minute 18, overview and scrutiny work programme. We will get to it later, but we minuted that we would add 2 items onto the work programme, and I just note that they weren't there. So perhaps we can come back to the car parking charges and waste management contracts at that part of the agenda.
Yes, certainly, Councillor Farmer. Thank you, and we'll amend the work programme going forward. Can I have a proposer for the minutes? Thank you, Councillor Dawn, and seconded.
Happy to second, Councillor Wildsmith.
Thank you. Apologies for absence. So we have apologies of absence from Councillor Drage, and Councillor Harwood, who is present in the chamber, has substituted for Councillor Drage. Apart from that, everybody else is present. Any declarations of interest? No declarations of interest. Do we have any public participation in respect of questions? So there are no questions from members of the public. Moving on to Chairman's announcements, I have two short announcements about relevant events. The first one is that the Centre for Public Scrutiny is holding its annual conference for local government scrutineers, which is on Wednesday, the 9th of December in London at Cavendish Square. So I would urge members to take a look at the programme for that. It's not released yet, the details, but it will be in the next couple of months. Well worth attending. And the second item is a webinar which is being run by the Local Government Association, which is a consultation on the new draft model member code of conduct. And that's a webinar which is being held online on Wednesday, the 26th of August from 11 in the morning till 12 noon. It's a discussion between member councils and focuses on the Nolan principles, civility in public life, and how the new model member code of conduct is being shaped for the future. Thank you. So let's move on to the substance of the meeting. And item 6 is the Ombudsman's annual review letter, paper B. I'd like to ask Mr. Phillips if he will speak to that, please.
Chairman, the Ombudsman is our final stage of the complaints procedure of the Council. We have a very good relationship with the Ombudsman. The Ombudsman has always been fair and clear in investigations. The Ombudsman is well respected across the country, has statutory powers to direct results, but has powers to inform results and us to actually follow those powers. The Council has always, as a matter of course, followed any recommendation from the Ombudsman. Even if we didn't agree with it, we still have gone down the route of accepting recommendations that come through. For many years, we've had an adverse report. We did have one not too long ago about a takeaway in Blackwater. This year, we've got a clean bill of health. The complaints are now all published on the web if you wish to see them. There are 5 complaints that the Ombudsman got involved in, a couple that he booted back as not being valid complaints to proceed with. But this report is really for noting that we've carried on exactly as we wanted to do, which is have a clean bill of health and Ombudsman. We compare well to our neighbours who also got very good results this year. But the Ombudsman's website is excellent. You want to look at past cases and compare performance of authorities against each other. So I do recommend that if you wish to look at how the Ombudsman deals with stuff, we've got very short reports, and they're now only a couple of sides of that, if not one page. Well worth looking at, lots to learn from them. We do regularly review our complaints and other complaints that are going on nationally, just to get an idea of how councils have responded. So this is a noting report only as you get each year. There's no bad reviews, and we're quite pleased with where we are at the moment.
Thank you. Are there any questions for Mr. Phillips about the letter? Councillor Makepeace-Brown.
Hi, good evening. It's not a question, it's just a well done to the way the administration, the officers have managed all of the complaints that have come in. I know we don't get lots, but I think that that report from the Ombudsman was well, very impressive, and our stats are impressive. So just a thanks to officers, really. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Moving on to item 7, which is the introduction to the Head of Corporate Services. So I'd like to hand over to Emma Foy to tell us all about herself.
Thank you. Members, I won't keep you too long with this item. My name's Emma Foy. I was appointed at the end of June, I think, to start on the 1st of August as your Head of Corporate Services and Section 151 officer. I've come here from Capita, and previous to that worked as 151 officer at Walden District Council and also acting 151 at Slough Borough Council. I've spent quite a lot of time in external audit, in internal audit, and I've also done a stint at MHCLG as well when it used to be called DCLG. So I've been round the block, but hopefully we'll be able to bring you solid sort of financial controls, as well as some of my experience around digitisation and transformation of financial services.
Thank you. So welcome.
Thank you.
Members, do you have any questions for Mrs. Foy, or I'm sure you will all join me in welcoming her. So, Councillor Farmer.
Yes, no, I was sorry, you beat me to it, Chairman. I was just going to welcome Mrs. Foy to both Hart District Council and, of course, overview and scrutiny. And I'm sure we look forward to her input and that of the team over the coming months.
Thank you, Councillor Farmer. So, on that note, that leads us nicely into your first item, which is revenue and capital outturn for 2019 to 20. Paper C.
Excuse me, Chairman.
Oh, yes, I do apologise, Councillor Dawn.
I've just raised a point of order because I understood from an email from Mr. Phillips on the 10th of August that Councillor Harwood was no longer a councillor. So I don't wish to be unpleasant, but I'm just questioning what the situation is.
Thank you, Councillor Dawn.
On the information we had at the time, the Section 85 rule applied. However, the staff helpfully went through fact-checking records, and we found that Councillor Harwood had attended the Overview and Scrutiny Committee on the 18th of February. So today actually puts him in the position. We found it out this afternoon, and we brought Councillor Harwood in to make sure that he can comply with his requirements under Section 85. So on that basis, it's a bit brand new information, and we're pleased to have Councillor Harwood here.
Okay, thank you. It would have been helpful to know that this afternoon and to sort of rescind your email of the 10th, but welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dawn. So, Emma, would you like to?
Of course. Paper C is the 1920 outturn position. The first point that I'd like to make, and I make this early in my presentation, is that this report is not in the same format that the budget was agreed. And the key reason for this is due to the restructure of the organisation. So in the budget that was originally agreed back in February, we had slightly different departments than we have now. So I have produced this report on the basis of the new service structure, and I've also produced this report later on with the accounting adjustments in it, which you wouldn't normally see in this way. I've received some feedback from members on this, and therefore, whilst I will talk through the report and different elements of it, I think it's up to members' agreement really as to whether you would like me to produce a new report for the Cabinet meeting, or whether you would like me to just produce an appendix which reconciles what we've got in here with what you would have seen before. So that's just a preamble to my presentation really, and something to think about for the debate at the end. So the main purpose of this report is around noting the underspend, the transfer of the underspend to the General Fund Reserve, noting the capital position and underspend, and documenting the carry forwards. So let us start with the outturn, and this is from section 4 onwards in the report. When we look back at Q3, the key variances around our forecast of an underspend of 631,000 were really around pressures in place around planning applications, some pressures around recycler income because the price per tonne of recycler had fallen, and also in effect an underspend around the decision to cease the piece of work on the new settlement and to replace that with garden communities, which will be partially funded by MHCLG. Since we've reached year end and beyond that, we've taken into consideration all the statutory charges, accounts and transfers. So this, as I said earlier, is a moved on position. Page 2, the report details the overall expenditure table. And if we talk through the final position, which is the performance against budget. So corporate services in Q3 were forecasting an underspend of £753,000. That's at the end of Q3 in February, sorry. However, in that last quarter, the expenditure levels were significantly impacted by some early COVID costs, the additional costs incurred in the purchase of the pavilion, and also costs incurred in ending the contract and bringing back accountancy, HR and payroll from our outsourced provider. So that is where the movement has taken place between an underspend of 753,000 and a final piece of £122,000. In terms of community services, additional income was received later in the year that could be coded to revenue expenditure, and this was unknown at the point that the budget was set and wasn't necessarily updated during the year from what I can see. So additional funding was received around housing and social inclusion and Section 106 contribution to affordable housing and strategy. This is not unusual, especially around housing grants from MHCRG, which always gets announced very late. However, in future years, I would like to almost protect against such swings by Council receiving and approving a revised budget each September, which takes account of all of the things that we didn't know in January, really, when we set the budget and produced the reports. Environmental and technical services shows quite a significant swing from what has been forecast. And I will be honest, today I have been fighting through the various expenditure codes to really understand what has happened there to cause what appears to be, a significant underspend. So we've got some key points here to consider. During the year and in Q3, we reported that due to a round changes on our waste and recycling contract, that we were having reduction in costs of between 150 and £200,000. But in addition, the main cause, which actually is reversed out in the line below, other operating expenditure, financing, investment, income, adjustments and transfers, is that an invoice, so income was reflecting for an invoice raised to Basingstoke, which later had to be credited. It wasn't correctly raised and it had to be credited later on. So we've taken that into consideration when we reversed it out in the other operating expenditure and financing investment income. But again, because of such a large difference, I would suggest that this is also incorporated in the reconciliation provided for members or in the updated report, whatever is decided to be better for the Cabinet meeting in September. The next area, or section 5 of the report, is around capital expenditure. Now, overall, capital expenditure was quite a bit bigger than what we were expecting and what we forecast. And the reason for this is mainly due to the fact that we had purchased both a deposit on Edenbrook and also the pavilion in Hedge End. There is an overspend in community, but this should not be considered an overspend, rather overperformance against the delivery of disabled facilities grants, which achieved much more in 1920 than had in previous years. Place has a very small unbudgeted overspend, and this is to do with us buying out the lease contracts on our multifunctional devices, our printers and our photocopiers. And finally, the capital expenditure in technical really was hampered by the weather, which meant that significant expenditure at Bramshot did not take place. In addition, there was also a capital budget for vehicles for the waste contract, which wasn't utilised. The next section of the report talks through the revenue budget carry forwards. They are stated there, and I'm happy to take any questions on these at the end. And if I can't answer these on the night, I will come back with further detail because I haven't got the system in front of me at the moment. And the final piece of the report is the general fund reserve. The balance was 5,537,000. It's increased to 6,380,000. Whilst this is a very welcome and solid increase to our general fund reserve, our future unfortunately still remains quite uncertain, and therefore when we come to looking at medium-term financial strategy in future workshops and meetings with members, I will be talking about how we protect that general fund balance. So I think that's all areas of the report that I've gone through. So
thank you. Okay, we have a question for, I'll obviously open now for questioning and discussion. And we have a question from Councillor Farmer.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you to Mrs. Foy for the report as well. I've got a few points to make, Chairman. Maybe I could do them one by one and a chance for response. First of all, the corporate services budget. I mean, this point we have discussed, I believe, at overview and scrutiny, and I believe it was again discussed at council. The 847 for the garden communities wasn't so much a ceasing of the project, it was a budget against a project that never took place after its removal from local plan. And correctly, the garden communities evaluation project is a new project, so that's not so much a saving as an item that never took place. In the context of the 1222 saving in corporate services, that's obviously 847 the other way. Is my only comment on that point. On environmental and technical, I would obviously very much welcome an explanation when it comes to light on the various savings. In the paper, it refers to income received of 665,000. That's a fairly significant sum of money. So it'd be interesting to know where that has come from. And the further 142 saved on the waste contract. I guess my question there is that's the saving in 1920. Is there going to be a similar ongoing saving in subsequent years, and will it be of the same magnitude? And even then, against that big saving, that still leaves about £460,000, which obviously is good news if it's money saved against budget. But it'd be interesting to know where the other savings or expenditure savings have come from in that part of or in that particular service. And finally, on the revenue, the operating expenditure and financing and investment income, again, Mrs. Foy referred to the performance against budget, which is 600,000. Again, that's quite a big sum of money. I personally would welcome a further explanation on what's led to that £600,000. That's the revenue points. Could I pause there, and if there's any comment? And I've got one question on capital as well.
Thank you, Councillor Farmer. So the first point, yes, in recognising that the corporate services budget was impacted by the scheme which didn't take place. In terms of the environmental and technical saving, yes, we will provide some detail on that round changes, but also I will look at how the 2021 budget has been set to see if this was incorporated within it, because the point is that it was reported at the end of Q3, which is at the same time as the new budget for 2021 was being built up. So we need to check whether that's been tipped in. Otherwise, we potentially got a new savings report. In terms of the issues around the additional income and the credit coming from it, I will again provide that detail, and the additional impact of underspends and overspends. If members are happy, I will provide a summary of all of those in excess of 10,000, because there's lots and lots and lots across ups and downs and little codes. But members are happy for me to provide a list of all of those in excess of £10,000, I think that will make it easier in terms of the length of the document.
Yeah,
and
thank
again,
you.
The final point was around our adjustments line, which again has quite a lot of adjustments in. I think the best thing to do on that is for me to provide a slight narrative statement of what's included and why, and then a table below that makes it up.
Okay, thank you very much. And may I just move on to a quick question on capital, Chairman?
Yes, please do.
Okay. Look, I understand that capital expenditure moves around and can be quite variable. However, two specific questions, which if they can't be answered tonight, it would be useful to get a response, maybe written at some point. Bramshot Country Park, 1,044,000, and Edenbrook refers to delays rather than cancellations. I just wondered if there's an update on the current timing of those projects, please.
Thank you again, and I can't give you an accurate timing at this point, but what I will do is I will speak to Mr. Elson and find out when those have been pushed forward to be delivered. Come back to you in response to all members of the committee.
Yes, thank you. Any more questions for? No, it's not clear. Okay, fine. Thank you. So, members, if we go to the front page of the report, we have officer recommendations. The first being 2.1 is that the outturn position of an underspend of 847,000 after transfers and accounting adjustments, the general fund revenue account be noted. And the next item, 2.2, recommended to Cabinet the 847k be used to increase the general fund reserve. Agreed. 2.3, outturn position for capital expenditure to be noted. So noted. And 2.4, recommended to Cabinet that the carry forward of the unspent revenue budgets as detailed in paragraph 6.1 be supported. I think we will agree that pending your various written responses in respect of Councillor Farmer's questions. Thank you, members. So let's move on then to the Treasury Management outturn, paper D. Can I invite you to?
Thank you. So each year we are required, in order to comply with some of the prudential regulations and requirements on borrowing, to report Treasury Management outturn and some of our prudential indicators to members. It is quite dry, but I will try and run through it in a way that's as explanatory as possible. So at the beginning of the report, on page 2, you will see some grey boxes in section 4 and section 5. These are the prudential indicators. These are required to be provided by SITFA, and our auditors will look at those as part of the audit of the financial statements. Page 4 details capital expenditure, and more detail was provided in the previous item on the agenda. We have currently a capital financing requirement of £23 million. This is what members and officers have agreed, is available as a borrowing element of external borrowing to be able to be borrowed to either enable investment or capital expenditure. The 23 million has not been used to its full extent in the year, and our gross borrowing position at the end of the year was approximately £12 million. Section 5 details what is deemed to be our affordable limits for prudential indicators. So we have the authorised limit, which is £30 million, right at the end of the boundary. The gross borrowing position during this year was 13.6 million, The 25 million is what we expected to borrow this year. And then we also provide our gross borrowing position and our financing costs as a proportion of our net revenue expenditure. The Treasury position in section 6 on page 3 shows our resources available and our resources borrowed. So approximately 12 million in borrowing at the end of the year and just short of 30 million in terms of short-term investments and cash equivalents. Section 7 is provided by our Treasury Management Advisors. So it's almost their opinion around interest rate risk and what the predictions are going forwards. So I won't comment on that too much, other than it's there and it's there for members to read and to understand. The borrowing outturn, which is on page 9, states where our money is held. And at the bottom of page 9, you can see where our resources are. Overall, our investment income in year, whilst above budget of £200,000, was £334,000, which is still a relatively low return on the balances that we do have invested. So an example would be that a fortnight ago we went to the market with £1 million that we could put away for a year, and the best we could get was 0.39%. So my suggestion would be going forwards that we move forward to some member working groups to look at our treasury management strategy with our independent treasury advisor to see whether there is a way of increasing our investment income whilst mitigating risk wherever possible.
Thank you. So, Councillor Radley.
I was just going to pick up on the very important point that Mrs. Foy has just made. I do think we have to look very seriously at different investment vehicles, and I fully support the initiative moving forward to actually look at better ways of investing which actually might make more effective use of the money that we hold on behalf of our residents, so that we can use that to actually invest into projects that this council needs to execute on. So when we start those working parties going, I look forward to some very constructive and productive discussions as to what we might be able to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Farmer.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, Councillor Radley might be very pleased to hear that. I mean, it was a point I was going to raise. The report does talk about a cautious approach to investment, and I don't think it would do any harm at all for some working groups and working parties to look at whether or not we might change our strategy a little without being reckless, of course, on investment. So I would welcome that personally.
Thank you. And Councillor Smith.
Well, my point I think has been mostly answered. I was going to ask Mrs. Foy as a new Section 151 officer to Hart to express an opinion on the general prudence and health of the capital strategy, and she started answering it there towards the end of the piece. So I think it's been mostly answered, but it still could be worth, just a general overview of the health of it.
So in terms of our investment strategy, I think a lot of authorities took a highly cautious approach following funds lost for some authorities when investing in Iceland approximately 10 years ago. So, and what hasn't necessarily happened is authorities haven't necessarily looked at some of the controls and the options that are available where we can mitigate risk where possible, but slightly increase our investment income. I think the interest rates that we're seeing now and what's predicted going forwards, the risk for me really is that when we are doing short-term investments, even 3, 6, 9, 12 months, when the interest rates are so low, you have a brokerage fee and a cost of the transaction, which potentially is outweighing a lot of the gain from the investment. So I think it would be a really proactive approach to bring Link Asset Services in, our independent treasury management advisors, to talk to members about what some other councils are doing and what an approach might be, and to share some ideas and provide advice in terms of what we might do going forwards.
Thank you. Councillor Farmer again.
Sorry, there's one point I forgot to mention earlier, Chairman. While supporting the working groups, working parties, I would hope, or maybe seek clarification from Councillor Radley, that these could be cross-party based upon the broad experience across the members, and of course that I think it should whatever comes out of that process should perhaps come back to scrutiny at some point in the future.
Thank you. Yes. Councillor Radley.
Yes, Madam Chairman. I think definitely any change in investment strategy would have to go to Cabinet. It would certainly therefore be prudent to put it in front of overview and scrutiny first. As to the makeup of working groups, I think we are open-minded as to how that will happen. I think it really depends on the kind of choices that we have to make. If we get an investment strategy advice which is clear-cut and definitive, there's no point wasting everybody's time sitting around talking about it. If we get presented with lots of different options, and some of those options could be considered political in nature, say perhaps ethical investments as an example, then I think it might well be worth having cross-party discussions about it. But let's actually see what advice we get given and the options we have to discuss, and then we can look at the best way of actually taking those, breaking them down and reaching a decision. I mean, if you're given a clear-cut piece of advice, there's nothing to discuss. Bring it to scrutiny. Have the good people of scrutiny with their expertise to say if they think the advice is sound or not. Pass those comments on to Cabinet. But if there's a discussion as to where we can invest, there's lots of choices to be made, then clearly it's worth bringing everyone with us through those kind of discussions. So let's wait and see the type of advice that we get given.
Thank you, Councillor Radley. If we look at the report, we'll see again under Officer Recommendation, it says to forward comments to Cabinet for consideration at its meeting on the 3rd of September. So I'd ask that those comments, which we have discussed today, they're fairly clear cut. If we can have those, then what I'd like to do is, Mrs. Foy, if you could actually circulate those to make sure we've captured them before for members to look at and make any comment on, before they actually get embodied then in going to Cabinet consideration. And then we've all agreed, because I think it's what we've discussed is very important in respect of potential future investments and a change to our strategy. Thank you. So there are no other matters here. I think on this item we'll move on then to Q1 performance information, paper E, and again I believe that Mrs. Foy is going to talk about that with some interjection from Mr. Phillip possibly, and also I'd like to draw members' attention. I hope you've seen that there was an update to this report which was issued this afternoon.
Thank you, Chair. So this report here summarises the information where available of performance for the first quarter of 2021. In 4.1 of the report, there are some considerations which make reference to the fact that in the first quarter of the year, especially at the beginning of the first quarter of the year, we were in uncharted waters, and supporting businesses and vulnerable people through our hub and through our business rates grants, which took a lot of our resource. If we then move on to the table, we can take any specific questions on the tables page by page. So page 3 shows the corporate services performance indicators. Chair, are you happy if we take questions page by page?
Yes, good idea, thank you.
So any questions around the audit plan or recommendations?
No, okay.
Okay.
Let's move on.
There is actually a point, going back, that I am going to just highlight to you, and that is RB06 percentage of council tax collected. In April, we had quite a reduction in council tax collected, and this was mirrored throughout the country with COVID-19. The point that I would make is that in general, and very much so, the Hart residents have caught up with that council tax point. And at the end of Q1, we were only down by 1.4% on what we were the year before. Now, I think actually we're probably one of the only authorities in that position.
Excuse me, Chairman.
Yes, I can see. I was just about to invite you to ask your question, Councillor Dawn.
Councillor Dawn, can I just clarify, is that percent collected on the number of collections or the value?
The value, the council tax base.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next page is around community services. So we've got our H KPIs, and that goes on to the following page as well. So I think we've got 17, well, not 17 of them, but we go from H02 to H17.
Any questions on any of those KPIs? No, okay, so.
Okay, and page 5 then moves on to environmental and technical. And that runs through page 5 to the very top of page 6.
So ET03 to ET12. Okay, so let's move on to the
place.
Next one.
Yeah, place services, R01 to R13, and that's on page 7.
So this is the one that was issued this afternoon. Councillor Dawn.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just a little confused about R13, the number of fly tipping complaints received by service, which is shown at 30. I've had a look through the fixmystreet.com system just this afternoon, and between the 1st of April and the 30th of June, there appeared to be 185 fly tipping reports across Hart. So it would appear, and I believe we've had this conversation previously, that the number of fly tipping complaints is severely underreported in this paper. And I know we've had some problems or comments from Hampshire about an increase in fly tipping during lockdown. So I'm really struggling with the idea that that Q1 number is only one more than was in Q1 of 2019.
Very good point, and it's Councillor Crooks has commented in the past on exactly the same issue, and it rises because of the way we calculate the service response rates. A lot of the ones that you're talking about, Fix My Street, are picked up through the street cleansing team, grounds maintenance, etc. that way round. These are the ones that are picked up through environmental health, which they've got different categories on there. For life of me, I wouldn't want to explain that just yet, so I think I wouldn't be quite au fait with it. However, I think it'd be good to actually give you a written response to actually understand that and try and find some way of reconciling both sets of figures into one consolidated figure, so you get what you would consider to be a more informed figure.
Well, I think fundamentally we're seeing more fly tipping, and certainly I am locally, and residents are complaining about it to me locally. So we've got to make sure that we're properly recognising that, and once we know there's a problem, I think we know there's a problem, we can perhaps do a little bit more about it. But thank you. I'll wait for an update as you suggest.
Good point, Chair.
Yes, that's a very good point. Thank you, Councillor Dawn. Councillor Forster.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a technical point on something that Councillor Dawn raised for clarification. My understanding from the latest figures I've seen from Hampshire County Council is the number of fly tipping incidents has increased. The tonnage, the amount, has actually decreased. But I do think, as the Chief Executive said, if we can get the accurate data, that would be helpful. And it would be also helpful if that could be published regularly by the relevant department.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, thank you. Good point. Thank you, Councillor Forster.
And the final section of the report, which is on page 8 onwards, discusses the service level agreement performance, particularly with the third sector.
Do we have any questions on that in respect of Q1, specifically related to COVID, in respect of Hart voluntary action and voluntary sector level agreements? Councillor Smith.
Well, I think the report says it all really, that the voluntary sector has responded amazingly well to COVID-19. So trying to compare against indicators that were put in place beforehand is fairly futile, really. But they've done an amazing job anyway.
Councillor Wildsmith.
Yeah, it was only sort of question on, because beforehand we'd always have the individual organisations come to us so we could sort of ask questions around it. I suppose ultimately ones which have been particularly involved in the COVID response, it would be quite helpful for them to come before us so we could sort of question them over areas which might have gone well, might not have gone so well. Is there a plan for that to commence at some point?
It's out of the pandemic, and I think some of them may not be resourced fully to start coming over to us. And there was a question of them are prepared to come along, by all means, but let's not forget COVID's not finished. We still don't quite know where we are with all sorts of things, so it's not business normal. So I think on this case, it'd be nice to ask them, and we will do that for members. Please don't be offended by they can't do it. Just at this moment, that's the response initially, that's all.
Councillor Wildsmith, I think, and committee, I think it is a good idea to ask various organisations who are encapsulated within Hart District Council to come and present. So if you could, Mr. Phillips, ask them, and then we will at some point arrange for within the work programme and the meetings for them to come and present so that we can have a discussion about actually what went on. I'd be specifically interested in respect of the recovery phase as opposed to the response phase, which we're still in. So I think that's important that we take a look at that in the future. Councillor Smith.
Sorry, lower my hand this time.
Okay. Thank you. Are there any other comments or questions on this performance report for Q1? Thank you. So the next item on the agenda is the establishment of a corporate vehicle for property holding purposes. I draw members' attention to paper F. And also you will have had under confidential cover the appendix to that. Can I ask Mrs. Foy who's presenting that? Okay, and I think we have Councillor Radley here as well.
And you've got Councillor Quarterman from the personalisation aspect has joined us too.
Thank you.
Chair, we need to start the debate about where we're going with commercialisation in terms of our property holding. We are going to be picking up property. We bought a an office block at Eastleigh, and we are in early 2021 to take possession of 41 flats at Edenbrook. We don't need a property company to take commercial property in any shape or form. We hold property in our own right. But we're keen to make sure that the objectives of commercialisation, that we keep a long-term income stream. And the issue that we need to protect the council's interest is that we don't lose by default through the way that organisations that the council set up our residential income to right to buy, etc. That wasn't the purpose why we're buying property. It was actually to meet the commercialisation objective of creating an income so we support council services. So we do need to establish a company. Whichever way we go, we've known we need to do this, and I think members have had that conversation in the past, and that's not really the purpose of the report in front of you. But what we haven't started to do is frame what that company should be. And there are many vehicles of company that could be picked up to take it on, particularly when you start coming up to issues associated with tax liability, relationship with the council, who's in control of it, who's on the board of directors, etc., who's the shareholder. All good questions, probably simple answers in many ways, tried and trusted routes. We've got some legal advice that says you can have this or you can have that. I think we're all pretty clear about what is the tried and tested route that works. But the purpose of today's report is really to let you know that we are actively thinking about the company and we now need to drive it on. And certainly Councillor Radley and Councillor Portman are very keen that we start framing that now to get it sorted so that we take Edenbrook next end of April in the right form and the right way, which is the most cost-effective way of doing it. It has a cost implication to the council as well. But we do just want to find out from members, generally speaking, from what the issues coming out of here. Is there anything that we're missing in our thought processes? There is no detail in this report, deliberately so, because the detail comes out of the options you go, but the legal advice is helpful to give you pros and cons, what you might want to do, what you might not want to do. But I think there are some sort of basic points. I don't think anyone's going to disagree that we set a company up. I don't think people really are going to disagree that the council should be the single shareholder of it. What people might be interested about how it's governance arrangements and what it's with the council, etc. And we need to just tease that out and explore how that works. So it's not transient membership of a board that's running a company. It's not turning on a political cycle. That's the biggest danger all councils face. But that doesn't mean to say councillors shouldn't be in control of it, which is the whole point. It is a council company, but its governance arrangements do then have implications for those members who are on the council and those members on the board. There's different rules and regulations coming through. So this is more, there's no right and wrong decision in this report. It's purely draft of an idea. We want to go down the route. We want to get a green light so we can get on and start putting details behind articles, associations and governance arrangements, have a proper full debate when it gets to cabinet, because it is a cabinet decision. But it's just trying to tease out from you as the start of the discussion, let you know that we're doing this and we need to get on with it, which is the right time to do it. But B, more about picking people's brains about what do you think might be helpful around the back to frame the final report that has to go to cabinet, so that Councillor Quarterman and Councillor Radley can respond to those in their own way and form a view as to what should be the right course for the council to take. So that's purely what's behind the report, nothing more, nothing less than that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Before I take questions and also we have a debate about this, I would again draw members to the recommendations, and they are that we're being asked to support the following proposed officer recommendation to Cabinet. That Cabinet agrees in principle to the establishment of a company which should be limited by shares and owned wholly by the council. And the second, that Cabinet agrees to a further report to be brought forward, and I stress at the earliest opportunity, outlining proposed governance and board membership arrangements, articles of association before any trading activity commences. So I shall open now to members of the committee, and I see that, and also of course we have our attending councillors. So first to Councillor Farmer.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Look, from my point of view, the recommendations are fairly clear cut, and I have no objection at all in principle to the establishment of a company. Point B on the recommendation is something I will await with interest. I think it will be very important to get the governance and board membership correct, and the Articles of Association. And I would add one point to that as well. It's also the moving into the new company, whatever it may be, of any investments which the council have already made, the implications of that and how we go about doing that. I think that's another point that will need to be considered, which maybe isn't mentioned in this paper.
Thank you. Noted. And Councillor Wildsmith.
Again, so I think, as Councillor Farmer said, points A and point B are sort of pretty clear cut and would sort of wholly support them. However, sort of point B, it would be nice, and obviously we come back through ourselves to overview and scrutiny to see a little bit more detail. Some of the items mentioned around reasons why you would or why you wouldn't have certain people in directorship positions, etc., seemed a little bit wishy-washy to me and didn't necessarily follow to how things would work in the corporate world as regards continuous change of directors. It isn't something which is uncommon, particularly sort of in financial services type companies where certain positions have to be on board. So I don't think that necessarily be a problem. So it'd be nice to get a little bit more detail behind the reasoning of which routes we're going for, and again, so an informed decision could actually be made. As say, because the report we had didn't seem to be, it seemed to be very biased one way, without giving sort of much thought to all the different alternatives.
You.
So I imagine that will end up with a debate at council.
Yeah.
The latter, clearly council want to ratify any decision of cabinet to set up a company. So my advice would be let's go back, put a paper to cabinet with the issues, and of course members can join that debate. But ultimately, you'll probably find at the end of it, it'll be a council sign-off with that. If you're not happy or there are issues that you want to explore, I'm sure you'll actually iron them out before we get that far, whichever way we go. So we'll keep you informed of how that comes out. But as I said, today's about debate, getting the debate started and let people understand the implications and to make sure that the report that goes to cabinet is fully balanced, picking up issues that come out today as well. And if you feel that there are more options that could be picked up in a more balanced way, that's how you'd like to put it, then clearly we'll try and do that as well.
Councillor Radley.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just to point out, I suspect it's quite possible for us to try and overthink this. At the end of the day, the company is a vehicle for being able to realise revenue as part of our commercialisation strategy, and to do so in a way that is tax efficient and doesn't overburden officers and members. And so I suspect we will come down with a structure and governance that actually fits that bill, i.e. is simple, effective, and does the job. This isn't a company that's going to be making major strategic decisions. This is a vehicle for being able to manage property that has come into the council's possession. That's what it's for. So let's not overthink it.
We'll certainly look forward to seeing those details, hopefully in not too distant future. So, Councillor Dawn.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just struggling a little bit with the discussion that's gone so far in terms of how an arrangement like this balances the possible conflict between the interests of the company and the interests of Hart, given that from the descriptions that's been circulated so far, the directors of the company would also be employees of Hart. And that, I think, creates quite a possible conflict of interest for the individuals involved. And I wonder if there might, and I completely understand the points that were being made earlier about, or in the report, about the political cycle and wishing to avoid members being drafted into the director's role in the company. But I'm just wondering if a sort of non-executive director type role is something that we should consider, either for particular key councillors, or indeed in terms of external expertise that one would want to draw into a company like that, to make sure that it's making the right decisions at the right time. Because, clearly Hart officers, although they have lots of experience in local government, don't necessarily have the same experience in corporate management, and it is a different beast running to slightly different rules, and we need to be aware of that.
Thank you, Councillor. Can I invite Mr. Phillips to?
Councillor Dawes, excellent point. Councillor Cortman's already raised that point with me today, highlighting stuff that's coming forward. He's well alive to what you just said, and quite right. So we need to balance all the options down there to make sure everybody who's involved in this company can achieve company objectives without prejudicing their work, the council work, vice versa, both way around. So we'll need to think that one through carefully. But I'm pleased to say that someone's already highlighted your point first. So it shows that they're like minds looking at it from the same direction. There's nothing this requires in tablets of stone. It's just really a discussion topic to get the debate underway. But that's a really good point. And yes, we'll pick that up. Certainly.
Thank you. I noticed him nodding. We've got to stop agreeing with each other. I'm sure it's bad for you.
Thank you.
Councillor Quarterman.
Hello.
Welcome.
Just unmuting myself. Right. Yes, and apologies because the Chief Executive has just made, of course, essentially the point I wanted to make, which is, but I just to re-emphasise the fact that the Cabinet has not yet had this discussion. We are very much at the stage of wanting to explore the opportunities. We want to have a debate about the right kind of governance for this. And the sorts of things that Councillor Dawn has just raised there are exactly the sorts of things that I would like to get us out onto the table and to have a proper discussion about at Cabinet, so that we can be very clear what all the various governance options are and that we're making the right decision. So the purpose of today's paper is really just to flag it up to you that is a debate that's ongoing and will be happening in the near future, to get an early soundings from you about how you feel about it. And then, so when we come back to you with our proposal, you understand the context, you understand the background, and that there's an ability to make a good decision about how we proceed with the governance here. So, and I'm encouraged by what I've heard so far this evening. That's great news, and I look forward to coming back to you with a paper in the relatively near future.
Thank you. Councillor Axon.
Thank you, Chairman. I think this is a very sensible move on our part. And I would just say something similar to Councillor Radley, that I don't think we need to overthink this too much. A lot of the issues I think we're concerned about can be dealt with when we draw up the Articles of Association and the objectives of the company. If they're clear and well defined, we shouldn't have a problem. And if we pay for proper good advice, I think this is a very sensible way forward.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments or questions? We've got Councillors Radley and Quarterman here. Nothing for them. Okay. So, Councillor Hart, apologies.
Just an observation, really. In this increasing uncertainty, financially and otherwise, I think it's a good thing that we're collectively being as proactive as possible. And in principle, I think this is very much the right path. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I think it's very important that we do ring fence those activities, and it makes perfect sense to put in place a very well governed independent company which is wholly owned by the council. That certainly, as far as my opinion goes, is the right way forward. So the recommendations, I think that we, from the discussion that we've had, that we are able to support the following proposed officer recommendations to council, and overview and scrutiny looks forward to seeing the detail on those aspects which have been raised in 2.1b. Thank you, members. So let's move on now to the overview and scrutiny work programme, and bearing in mind Councillor Farmer's comments in respect to the minutes, we will need to add in from those minutes of July the waste management contract and the car parking charges. Councillor Farmer, you've got your hand up. Did I preempt you? You've got something else to say?
You preempted me. I have nothing further to say, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Can we have any other comments on the work programme? clearly, as you know, it's work in progress, so things will be added to that as we go forward. Perhaps when we invite people to speak and other organisations within Hart District Council's remit to come and present, as Councillor Wildsmith has suggested. Councillor Dawn.
Thank you, Chairman. In the previous versions of this, didn't we have the various neighbourhood plans highlighted? And I would have thought we'll have a little pile of them just after the May elections. Or run up to that.
The neighbourhood plans go to Cabinet, not to Overview and Scrutiny Committee, so they're on the Cabinet work programme.
Okay, my apologies, thank you.
Thank you. So if there are no other questions or comments on the programme, I'd like to close the meeting and to say that the next meeting is on Tuesday the 15th of September. Yes, please.
I'm going to turn the Facebook page off now, the meeting's closed, but can I just ask for those who have been watching with our tech